welcome everybody, and it's great to see lots of familiar faces both from last year and this year. We, as part of the platform award, we've been running a number of sessions across the participating galleries for graduates and young artists, really to support them in that transition between leaving university and embarking on their career as professional artists. And that's really the subject of today's discussion. We've got an amazing array of experience and expertise, and we really want this to be a sort of question time format of obviously your questions and also your experience in terms of where you are as artists and curators and administrators. So what I've asked the panel to do is give us just a little piece about themselves and where they fit in terms of their role in supporting young artists. And once we've sort of situated them in terms of their roles, I think we'll very quickly go out to some questions. And really, I'll just reiterate some of the questions that we flagged up when we were devising this event. So it's what are the challenges and opportunities artists face when embarking upon a career? What support can they expect from galleries, dealers, and other artists? And how do they make sure they keep up their momentum after graduation? And just to say, I don't know if any of you heard Grayson Perry this week, but I thought he put it beautifully when he was describing that moment, and he described it as a poignant moment where somebody's at a party. Is that right? He said somebody's at a party and you've just left college and somebody says, what do you do? And it's that moment of, what do I say? Do I say I'm a student or do I say I'm an artist? And it's that kind of moment of transition. I think that's what we're really looking at today, and trying to find all the kind of, and help you with all the kind of strategies that you need to really make that transition. So we'll start with Jonathan, if that's all right. Just
someone has to go first.
Absolutely, and there you are.
Okay.
Jonathan.
My name is Jonathan Viner. I run the gallery, Jonathan Viner Gallery. I've been running it for about 7 years now. I actually come from an art background, in as much as I studied as an art student for 5 years. After that, I went on to the Royal. I spent actually most of my time as a student in everybody else's studio, more interested in what they were doing than what I was actually doing. And by the time I left art school, I realised that I wasn't going to be an artist, and that I wanted to work in the art world, and was interested in what everybody else was doing, and decided that I would get involved in a gallery. I decided to go to the Royal College of Art and did the curatorial programme. And while I was there, even at that point, I was working for galleries. Even before I left the Royal College, I started working for Gagosian Gallery, which is a very large American gallery. And I soon realised that not only did I want to work with artists, but I also wanted to work with them in the commercial side. No disrespect, I didn't want to work in a museum. I didn't want the bureaucracy. I wanted the freedom of being able to work quickly and without huge boards to discuss things with, perhaps a little bit more independently. There are lots of other challenges that come with doing it that way, mainly financial, although these guys will always argue that they always have a financial problem as well, and always having to negotiate a series of financial problems. I mainly work with younger artists, usually not straight from college, but a couple of years or 2 or 3 years out of college. Quite often I'm the first gallery that the artists that I have worked with actually have had a working relationship with. Every young artist kind of wants a gallery, and they look at galleries and think that we have all of the answers, which we don't. But we are looking, we're looking for artists, they're looking for us, and hopefully we find each other. And that's kind of That's kind of how it's worked for me anyway. As a young artist now, I think there are a lot of opportunities. The audience has grown exponentially for contemporary art. The audience that comes to see shows, also my audience, which is also those guys, but also the audience who actually are going around looking at art and buying art it's grown absolutely exponentially. I travel around the world, meeting clients all around the world. It's a bigger and bigger thing. The opportunities are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and I think as a young artist, there's a lot going for you.
And do you just, out of interest, you were saying about finding each other, the young artists in the gallery. I mean, presumably you get a lot of approaches from young artists. What are you looking for when artists approach you?
That's such a hard question.
Yeah.
And it's quite a question that I get. I mean, I can say the way it's happened for us is that, there's a certain amount of luck. Some of it really, it can just be a matter of, you're talking, you're having a chat and you get on with someone and someone recommends somebody and then you go and see them. And the way that our gallery and the artists that we've sort of taken on really has been like one telling us of the other, and people recommend. I mean, once the ball starts rolling, people and artists that you already work with are saying, maybe I was in somebody else's studio the other day, maybe you should go and have a look at that. It is a lot of word of mouth.
Right.
We do get people just cold calling us, and I don't know if that is always the best way, but there have been times when people have come round and called me and just like poured their portfolio out on the floor. And actually and some of them have gone on to, and without naming names, one of them 2 years later was on the front cover of Art Forum. So, there is no sort of right or wrong way to do it.
Matthew, do you want to?
Sure. So, yes, I'm artistic co-director at Limbo. Limbo's an artist-led non-for-profit organisation just off Margate High Street. It was set up in 2003 to provide affordable artist studios, fundamentally, and also to run a project space which hosts our exhibition programme and is available to hire for artists and organisations looking for a space in which to experiment. I think that Limbo wants to contribute to Kent becoming a place where emerging artists can develop in a supportive environment where their ideas and work will be discussed and challenged. Our programme foregrounds individual artists' work and working methods ahead of group shows, say, or curatorial conceits. And it has three areas of focus. The first is solo exhibitions by emerging artists, and those tend to be chosen by our programming team. Secondly, we run a yearly project where we invite a later career artist to have the room to experiment and collaborate with others. And the third thing is a membership scheme. We've just set that up this year as a way to get emerging artists to share their work with us and to create a network through which they can become involved in our programme. So we're always looking to expand our team. The membership culminates, I suppose, in an annual selected members open exhibition, which is judged by guest artists and curators. So Sarah from Turner Contemporary and Bob and Roberta Smith are judging this year's open. And then one artist from that show will be selected by us for a solo show the following year. And that's how we work.
And just, we won't promise we won't go on about funding, but just out of interest, what is your sort of model in terms of how you work? You were saying earlier that there's a lot of kind of voluntary input?
There is, and that's mainly because of the programme. The studios are almost viewed as separate in that that's something that runs itself, so anything extra that we generate through the hire of the space, or a little bit that comes out when our studios are completely full, that goes into the programme, and then we are reliant on funding from the Arts Council and other bodies to run that.
Great, thank you. That's great. So we'll move on to Lauren now.
Thank you. I think principally Turner Contemporary wants to be a resource for artists at all stages of their careers, I suppose with reference to the local area in particular, but obviously much further afield also. We want people to come to the gallery at all ages, from tiny to much older, and really see the best art there possibly could be in this context, from historical to contemporary art, and that people then come and are inspired to make things perhaps, or do something completely different with the experience. But I think we offer fantastic exhibitions of a wide range, and also things like this where people can come along and get involved in conversations. Platform is a really key part of what we do with respect to artists. I think that's a wonderful thing for us because it gives us a chance to work really closely with individuals, and also, very importantly, to have contact with the universities and the context where young artists in the area are developing their practices. Universities are really, really important for us, and we continuously want to enrich those relationships and think more and more about how we can work together. Certainly that's not the only, going to art college isn't the only way to develop an art practice, but that for us is a really important connection. So we've done that, through Platform, but also in other ways. So we co-commissioned some amazing works with UCA by Mark Wallinger and Lindsay Sears last year. We teach a module for Canterbury Christ Church University's BA in photography, and I have some students here today from that, which is great. We work with UCA's MA in curating, the RCA Creative Writing course and curating course, the University of Kent, in addition to Platform, we're working with them on a project to celebrate their 50th anniversary in 2015. So, there's lots of different projects and different ways that we develop those relationships over a long period. At the moment, we're thinking more about what we can do beyond the Platform program and beyond the sort of offer that we have of talks and events to continue to support artists through professional development. So now is actually a really good time for us to be having this conversation. We've done various things at different stages, including sort of group crits and a sort of salon series where artists could come along and talk about their work. And that, for various good reasons, didn't seem like quite the right model. So now we're really starting to look again at what can we do, how can we best support this community, and importantly, how can we be part of a broader ecology in the area. So, what Matt and his colleagues are doing at Limbo and at Crate and the various other organizations, resort studios, there's lots of organizations in Margate, but also other organizations outside of Margate, Folkestone's Creative Foundation, DAD in Dover, the Whitstable Biennale, all sorts of different organizations. How can we together as, as colleagues work to complement each other and kind of create a playing field where there's a lot of different opportunities that artists can access, and where one member of that consortium or whatever can connect someone to another very easily. So that's something I think we're really thinking about a lot at the moment. But yeah, I think, principally we exhibit the best things that we possibly can, and we try and do really high quality programming, and we hope that is a very good starting point. But of course, the relationships are absolutely key.
I think you bring up something that's kind of key to the work that we've been doing, because obviously we are the galleries that we represent are not London. They're not in London. And what is interesting is this idea of, post university is where, as a young artist, you position yourself in terms of the kind of support and critical mass that you need. And it's interesting, Joella, perhaps you could say something about your decision to move from being in a regional university to gravitating towards London.
Yeah, it was more choice because I lived near London, so it was a great choice that I then started to live there. But it was also because I needed a lot more support from other artists, which wasn't so much, unless they were your friends, but most of them kind of disappeared to other places as well. So just London seemed to have a lot more of a gathering of people like you almost, that you could help kind of grow as an artist.
And your studios, you've found that with, particularly through where you've placed yourself in terms of studio, have you?
Yes, yeah, I kind of placed myself where I'd be around with other artists as well. I was a studio by myself, but it just kind of didn't work so well because I had no one to bounce off ideas with. So I made sure that my next one that I had a studio with other artists that, even just to go out for breaks and stuff, it kind of helps to have that little break from doing your work and you can discuss things. So
And how's the year been for you?
no, it's been great. It's given me time to be able to do new work, but also meet, kind of other directors and curators of the galleries who've been going around and see how they work. And, it's been great there for support. And it's really
I'll give you that £5 in a minute. Can we move on to Adam, who I was going to ask you this question of at what point do you sort of say to yourself, I'm no longer an emerging artist, but I'm an established artist? When does that happen? Do you feel that? Do you wake up, you think, I've arrived?
I've emerged. No, I definitely don't. It's a really good question. I don't know how other people would answer that. I mean, I definitely always feel I'm right at the start, and actually kind of make work almost, partly out of that sort of situation. So, and the years pass by, and still, it's a feeling that you're right at the beginning again. But I know this is a feeling also shared by, established writers who again also find it very useful to. I can't remember who it was. There was the Guardian did a questionnaire of 10 rules for writing fiction, which they sent out to lots of established published writers, and quite a few of them who are Booker Prize winners and have published many books. One of their rules was to remind themselves that the feeling that they were a kind of hoax and that they were, in the wrong place and that no one really understood how awful they were, was never going to go away. So it's something you just live with and you make work out of that sort of feeling of precariousness. But I think, I think there are other artists out there who definitely would feel quite differently. And I know from students that ex-students of mine who are often the really, really good ones, and I've run into them years later and they've stopped making work. And one of the reasons they'll give is that they never thought they were good enough, because I think there's a mythology which, comes through the media and various kind of star artists, which is that you have to have this incredible kind of conviction and self-belief and a belief that you're a genius. Otherwise, it's not worth doing it. And actually, a lot of the students who have that belief are the not very good ones, I think. And the ones who are working through a position of doubt and uncertainty are actually the ones who are really exploring new territory. But I think it's very difficult to trust, particularly when you leave college and you have this terrible kind of feeling of letting go of this one thing that was sustaining you, to feel that you've got the courage to, I think it requires a lot of courage.
And what do you think is the role of the university? Is there a role in the university in sort of, in a way, supporting that transition? Because, I mean, what we're trying to do here is bring the two, in a way, bring two sectors together to try and support the change from being a student to an artist. From your position as an educator, do you think there is enough done, or it does, colleges do a very good job in preparing students for what's to come?
I think it is changing. I think there was, I mean, I know friends of mine who did the Slade MA, this is sort of about 20 years ago. None of the tutors turned up to the MA show, and this was a lesson to show what it was going to be like afterwards. You were going to enter this kind of abyss. So
How horrible.
So there's that. But I think it has, you know, I hope it's changing. I think the sort of networks, particularly out of London, are so much better than they were, which is why,
I think you're right,
you know, it's
yes.
partly that there's an economic reason why artists don't immediately gravitate to London, having finished, you know, degree courses in Manchester or Bristol, or you know, they're staying on and creating artist-run spaces and studio spaces and creating their own scenes, which is really good. But as to the role of the, you know, of the university and kind of helping sustain that, I'm not totally sure. So this is, you know, this is, I think, a sort of relatively kind of rare situation. I mean, we were talking when we were getting together to do the judging about, well, actually a lot of the art students were saying that they really would benefit from the idea of mentoring. And there are very, very few mentoring schemes out there. You know, the Lux does an associate artist one for people working in moving image. The ICA did one for a little bit, but I mean, I think I mean, I would love some mentoring. And there's a point where I think just having the kind of framework for a sustained conversation, when you were saying about why you moved from a studio by yourself to one where you can at least have breaks and talk to other artists. It's really important, that dialogue, and once you leave college, I think it can be very difficult to have.
Do you find the pressure on you as gallery professionals, that requirement to sort of really support artists, you know, not just sort of on a professional level, but in terms of really supporting them in terms of artists, in terms of developing their practice? Jonathan?
I mean, it's always a conversation that's constantly going on with the artists about their practice. I mean, what they like from me is they like to have some economy. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, you know, I'm not there as their kind of mother. I mean, sometimes that they, you know, sometimes we, you know, we can have these conversations, but of course we're conversing all about the work all the time, but you know, they're much happier when they're actually getting a check and they're being paid. They need to pay their rent. They need, you know, it's tough. It's tough. You know, it's always a struggle, especially, you know, when you're working with younger artists, and you know, it's a struggle for us, like trying to tell the world about this young artist and trying to, you know, bring in some revenue for them. I mean, that's. I mean, I'm not sort of under any illusion. That's really what my primary aim is to. I mean, I obviously have to, and you know, and if I'm doing all those, you know, if I'm explaining the work well, if I'm introducing it to the right people, the people who I think are interesting in it, then that economy will start to happen. And when that economy is happening, I mean, of course, it has a, you know, there's a sort of monetary value there as well, but that's also indicative of like other things that are happening. Yeah. Because, you know, the money will start to flow once we started moving the work around, and I mean, just getting people to think about the work and talk about the work, then things come from that.
But it's, I mean, my perception is that artists, especially, you know, they feel they have a lot to say. And I guess my concern is always, you know, trying to encourage people to find different places and opportunities for saying that. And, you know, what Adam said, I think, is really pertinent about how challenging it can be to accept the condition of instability of that. You know, what we're doing in this business is trying to understand the world. I mean, that's kind of a big thing to do. And I guess, you know, the thing I found really rich being in this context is that it's a very kind of supportive environment. And I think, I mean, you know, you've been working a lot here as well. I think, you know, from the institutional perspective, we can't have close relationships with every single member of the community, much though we would want to. It's just impossible. But what we can do is try and bring opportunities for the community to be self-supporting. And I think, but, you know, for us, we're not the only game in town at all. And it's really important that we help to support other resources that are there. I mean, you guys do a huge
Well,
amount in that respect.
Yeah, I mean, that paradigm doesn't really work for us. We are the artists that want
Yeah.
the dialogue. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
that's why
Yeah.
we're doing it in the first place. So all of these sort of efforts around programming a certain way and around all the other stuff that we do is born out of a desire for that.
I think it's probably time to get some questions going.
My name's Michael, and I'm part of the 124 Studios, based in Maidenhead. And we're at the point now where we're looking to branch out into larger galleries and also looking for permanent studio space. Do you have any advice for how to approach galleries, either as a single entity or as a group show, and the best way to go about it?
Well, let's talk. Should we talk about Turner first of all, and then talk about Limbo? Yeah.
Can you just say a little bit about what sort of a thing you have in mind to do?
Well, we're a wide variety of artists,
Yeah.
really, coming from printmaking to fine art painting, and we're looking to kind of, a group show,
Right.
either installation pieces, site specific, or to actually just bring our work that we've produced and display it on a kind of larger scale.
Right. I think, you know, we get approached with these kinds of things all the time, and I think it's frustrating for us to not be able to always support the kinds of things like this that we would want to do, however good we think the work is, because fundamentally we have to program so far in advance, and it's quite boring sometimes. But, you know, in order to do the level of programming that we want to do, we have to program so far in advance that we can't respond always to these kinds of proposals in the way that we would want to. So we encourage people like that to come along. You know, we offer suggestions of other places that can make more responsive decisions like that. I mean, I think, you know, for a collective like that, you guys have the resource of each other. And I think it's fantastic to be able to club together and then, you know, certainly talk to people like us, get advice, that sort of thing. But also, you know, just ask a shopkeeper if you can borrow their empty shop. You know, well, that's brilliant. That's exactly what you should be doing. And I think then it's just about telling people about what you're doing. And I think once you've evidenced that you can do that really well, you know, get people like me or people from, you know, other organizations locally to you to come and see what you're doing, and then those opportunities develop. But it does take time, I'd say. You can't just expect to kind of walk into, you know, Tate and say, "Hello, Tate, we're great," and that for them to go, "Okay, here's a gallery." It's just unfortunately practically impossible that way. But it doesn't mean that, you know, those relationships won't develop over time, that something might happen down the line. You know, and I think it's really, you know, Jonathan was saying about being in the right place at the right time and having these discussions. It's just about those networks. I mean, for you guys, perhaps it's a bit different.
I mean, I'd like to say one thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I've just been recently working with a collective, a group of artists from New York called the Stillhouse Group, and we've done 3 shows with them now. Some members of them were in our group show in the summer here in Margate. We did a solo presentation of the whole group in Athens in September. And we've just had a small group show. Carl Andre, Nick Darmstader, who's part of that group, and Oscar Tours on an artist we represent. Now that group consists of 8 members. They all have their individual practices. They have got together and hired a whole floor of a building in Red Hook, just off the outskirts of Brooklyn. They've got a studio manager. They've got a spare space on that floor where they're doing their own exhibitions of their own work and inviting artists in to do their own work. They are one of the members is perhaps sort of leading the group a little more and has sort of become a little bit more of a spokesman of the group. But they've very successfully created a very strong identity, and I mean that's become a big success. And I'm using them as an example. I mean it's all up to you. You can do it. You can absolutely do it.
You don't really need us, actually, as much as you might think you do, I would say.
What would you say, Matthew? I mean, well, it's what you've done, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes. I think you have to have a degree of awareness of where you are and what the needs are perceived. If you're looking for public funding, what the needs are perceived to be in that area. and it's bureaucratic and political and can be quite tedious, I think. But that's always going to feed into that. You have to have the right place and the right time.
I mean, I'm aware that we've got David from Delaware Pavilion, Emily from Modern Art Oxford, Jonathan from Aspex. In a way, I know that you're in a very similar situation with Turner Contemporary, in as much as that the programme is quite restrictive. Can I ask you, David, because you and Dan did some sort of other projects, so there was that sense of...
We actually ran a project space as well as our day jobs, specifically for the kind of purpose that you were talking about. So we were kind of offered this space in St Leonard's, which was an artist studio, but it was a space that would be suitable to be used as a gallery. And we did a funding application to Arts Council to do a year's programme, which was about supporting artists to make new work and to do something different with their practices. So, you know, that's an example of, I'm a curator of Delaware Pavilion, so I'm in Lauren's position a lot of the time. But you can do that for yourself. I agree with everyone on the panel, you can do that for yourselves.
Yeah, I think we're hopefully going to kind of snowball that's where we're next step.
But it sounds to me like you have to have what your idea is. Lauren at the beginning asked what you wanted to do. I think your idea needs a bit more forming before you can do something with it.
Joanna Jones, Dover Arts Development, Dad.
Hello.
Dad started as two artists who arrived in Dover. I came from Berlin, and Claire was living in Luxembourg, and she had just done her BA at CAIAD, University of Creative Arts. We found ourselves living in Dover and started thinking about what we might do as artists to create some kind of life that seemed the kind of life that we would like to explore and live in. And that's how Dover Arts Development grew. So it grew from two artists having a conversation.
I think one question would be about Arts Council. I think it's quite interesting these days, given that there's a huge pressure on the Arts Council. I'd like to ask, people are always recommending go for Arts Council grants. What about turning on its head and saying there are cuts in it, and to what extent does actually applying for Arts Council funding stymie free creation and expression, and there's some arguments that fringe events should be not part of the Arts Council, outside of that box and in parameters where they can really freely express themselves. It's just come up with a lot of people that I know who are forcing their practice into ticking the boxes and looking at an aspect of it and not able to challenge it from within that paradigm. So I just want to pull that out and ask the panel about that and alternative ways to support practice other than just collectives.
I'd just also like to throw into the mix something that Lauren was talking about before the panel discussion, which was also kind of alternative ways of education. And I was talking about MAs and that kind of sense of alternative approaches to actually further education. Stephanie, do you want to say anything? I don't want to put you on the spot as our representative from the Arts Council, but would you like to say a little something about how you see this relationship between, you know, what you invest in and the necessary ecology that really feeds those institutions?
There's also a bit of a misconception around lottery funding, I think, especially under the smaller scale funding. We are being quite specific now that it can be used for R&D, it can be used for artistic development. We want to see how you're using that funding to push your career and your ability and what you want to do. So, you know, I think there is an audience requirement there, quite a lot. We are publicly, you know, it's public funding for the benefit of the public, but it is also to be used for artists to be as good as you can be and develop your talent as much as you can. I think we also exist to help make those connections and support artists to make the right partnerships. So all the people on the table in front of you and all the people in this room, you know, we do our best to know where the right place to go for the right partnership, to make the right connection, which might not be financial. It might be a festival, it might be Whitstable sat next to me, or Stour Valley, or, you know, there's all the organisations in this room have some kind of strand of activity, and we as Arts Council officers, try and make sure we know where all that activity is and point you in the right direction. So it might not just be a financial relationship. For much more advanced and ambitious projects, of course, there are more requirements. The more money you come in for, the more we would expect you to deliver in return and a more of an impact publicly. But for those small-scale, experimental, developmental projects, there's always a pot of money there to apply to. I think at the moment we're looking at around a 50-60% success rate, and there is money in the pot. It's not disappearing. So I think always give it a go, always look at the application forms and always see what you can do with it. But you're right, make sure you think it through, make sure you know where you're going and what direction you want to go and what your achievements are that you want at the end of it, so that we can really work with you to identify how to get there. But there are lots of other methods too.
Adam, can I ask you, have you ever had Arts Council funding or any kind of funding? I mean, what's your sort of, in terms of your development, in terms of your career, have you found these kind of routes of working collaboratively with other artists, or have you worked?
I've never done that.
Right.
But I have, Arts Council funding, and I mean, I think the situation just keeps changing, and so I mean, there's lots of funding that used to be around 10, 15, 20 years ago that it isn't now. There was a phase where lots of artists were applying to do Arts and Humanities Research Council funded fellowships, which I did at the University of Kent. And then that became more difficult. I mean, it was amazing just watching how the goalposts changed and became narrower and narrower for that. From, because I was given, for instance, someone's fellowship application for UCA Maidstone. And it was only sort of 3-4 years beforehand, but it was completely different. I mean, it was sort of a quarter of the size. And then recently, a lot of artists seem to be applying to do PhDs, which is another way of getting funding. I think, I mean, it's really strange. I mean, it's amazing here that there still is a way of avoiding having to have absolutely full-time employment in order to maintain yourself as an artist. I mean, there just seems to be just about enough to allow that. But I did I ran a program in Banff in Canada, and every single one and they were all Canadian or North American artists who all had to have had a number of exhibitions to get a place in the program. But every single one of them had a full-time job as a graphic designer, or it's much tougher over there. Or you have to have come from a wealthy background, so it really makes it quite divisive as to who's able to kind of get through that system. So still over here, I think it's pretty good, but it's not easy.
I think there's an aspect in terms two strands. One is that people are paying far more for courses now, something like £9,000 a year. That's £27,000 for your fine art degree or photography. I'm around a lot of this. So you've got that kind of investment, and then the expectations for students in terms of what they want to do. Some might just say, I want to be an artist. Well, I don't have to think of a career path, because it almost goes against what they're feeling, what they want to do. On top of that, where there's this sort of shift towards a more theoretical underpinning, which is why people are going off to do research and development, PhDs, what happens when you also have to get more training in certain aspects of making art, because you haven't covered that during your 3-year course. So I'm also seeing people having to do extra courses when they've left in certain media to learn how to use them, which adds to it. And I just think this sort of economic aspect is a problem, but it's based on a whole sort of paradigm that's happening at the moment, which we have to kind of investigate a little bit as well, because it's quite problematic, I think, to keep surviving and keep motivation.
That's
That's what
I was just going to say in response to that, I think it's wonderful that the economy of all of this has meant that, artists like gentlemen in the back are going out and doing stuff together, and there are other alternative means of developing your practice in a more formal way without paying money as well. So there are these kind of alternative courses that are developing that are funded in various ways, but often they're kind of just a collective of people coming together. And basically you don't pay for them, but you get the benefit of the community and a lot of access to artists and curators and that sort of thing. So I'm thinking, for example, of Open School East in London, which just opened this year, and they've had their first cohort start recently. We have the collaborative research group at Crate, and Louisa, who's behind you, maybe can say a couple of words about what that is. I mean, you know, they're small, but I think, you know, there are, you know, and then initiatives like Limbo and Limbo expanding its capacity. I think there are things coming from the bottom up, and that's what's really important, that things come from the bottom up and from what artists feel that they need to support their own practice.
But I don't think that should be held up as a kind of polar opposite of making an investment. I think I think it's just a reality of anything. If you care about it and you want to make the best of it, and you have to put a lot of time and effort and sometimes money into it. I mean, there might be a question about value for money on art courses, but that I would say tends to be down to a difference of expectation, and I don't know how to answer that question, but there's always a need to go above and beyond if you want to really get into something where there's not a huge amount of scope for getting paid to do it.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say, as somebody that's been around for far too long, I mean, I do remember Jonathan was bringing up the example, but I mean, I remember at times when there was actually you know, boom times, there was a lot of sort of self-help groups that I was involved with, City Racing, which was a very long time ago, and they've become these kinds of examples of sort of do-it-yourself practice.
Yeah, it happens all the time.
And actually have been incredibly influential, you know, in terms of looking back at the way that they impact on the visual arts sector across from the commercial to the public sector. So I think these small interventions can really make an impact.
But someone's doing a lot of work to make those things happen.
Yes.
Ultimately, they're putting their own money into it or extra time.
I think
It's usually a lot of time and work. It's not just the money. It's a lot of time and work to put together those kind of things.
Is that a choice? I often think it's a choice that artists can make about how, you know, how being involved in something like that really benefits them in terms of acquiring new skills and new connections, and also sometimes impacting on their practice as well, because it can do, because it kind of gets you out there. I mean, there are artists obviously make choices about the way in which they work, but if you sort of want to be out there engaging in sometimes the bureaucracies, local authority, you know, schools, whatever, you know, it can be seen as part of actually a growth in the way that you work and operate as an artist. Can I ask, it's a very rude question, but can I ask you how you are managing to sort of, you know, work this year in terms of what you've been juggling in terms of jobs?
Quite a few jobs. But I tend to, now I tend to try and mix up with different kind of jobs. So it's not just one almost kind of low level, it's not just either restaurant or coffee shop. I kind of decided that I wanted to, if I was going to have to do these kind of jobs, I wanted it to be in different skills. So I was kind of learning on the way. So I was working as like a carer, just like once a week, and then I was working for a gallery for a long time. And then I was just doing more coffee shop for more stability. But it gave me that mix up during the week where then I had my days that I would go to the studio. So it was having to obviously almost take a full-time job but in several different jobs.
Yeah. It's called a portfolio career. Euphemism. And how have you dealt with the issue of, you know, keeping a momentum going in terms of your work?
It's hard. I think I've made sure there's always something that I'm going to be doing. So once I've done one exhibition, I then look for what I want to do next, or while I'm doing one thing, I'm making sure once that's finished, I've got something a few months later to keep me, that there's something always there. So I'm always motivated and know that, you know, that there's something, at least I'm doing something, even though, you know, I'm doing things that I don't particularly want to do. There's always, I'm doing something that I want to do, and there's opportunities that always kind of come about, luckily. So.
Jonathan, do you want to say something about that whole thing of keeping the momentum going? Because Jonathan's been working with Joella in sort of supporting her in terms of some of the issues that she's been dealing with.
I'm Jonathan Parsons, I'm an artist, and I also work for Aspex as an advisor. And I've been involved in the platform process in terms of selecting graduates from their degree shows and also providing professional development for the artists around the region. I think I'll just say a little bit about this idea of the portfolio career, because it's quite a familiar story for an artist that they have to assume many different roles in order to survive. And I would say that I think that there isn't sort of one pathway for an artist. Every artist has their own sort of unique set of circumstances and their own trajectory through, and the way they survive and actually get paid and pay the bills and all the rest of it is very various. And as Joe was talking, I was thinking, you know, I work as a freelance professional development advisor. I'm a university lecturer, and I sell my work. Those are the ways I make money. And I had 3 days together in the studio last week. Normally I manage like 2 or 3 days a week in the studio. And I've been doing so many different pieces of delivery in the previous 2 weeks. I think I did 6 different lectures across one entire week at 5 different locations. But when I actually got to the studio, I had a plan of what I wanted to do. But as I started to work on the actual piece, I couldn't remember how on earth to concentrate on making work. So I think, you know, I very much resonate with what Adam was saying about always feeling that you're at square one, and I'm quite pleased to hear that seems to be quite a positive thing, that you are sort of, as an artist, you have to be quite tough on yourself, you have to be really resourceful, and you do have to have a lot of drive to stick at it and to keep going, and to have that vision that you actually want to see something that's made manifest. And I think that's the key thing that I see with students and with artists who come to see me is this idea of having a personal vision that you want to realise. You want to realise this vision. If you want that enough, you're going to find a way of doing it. I don't know if that's a question.
No.
I think maybe I'll bounce back to you guys and ask a question about the visibility of artists and perhaps how that is affected by the interconnectedness of the various different types of activity artists run, how that affects the commercial market, and how the commercial market relies to an extent on the publicly funded sector for the endorsement of their artists.
Good question. Good question.
Good question. A lot of questions there. Well, I said right at the beginning, I've never been a big fan. I mean, personally, I don't like filling in the forms and actually claiming Arts Council money. It's just, I've always gone out and tried to get it myself and try to earn it myself, or trying to make some business myself. It's kind of, although I realise I am the recipient of quite a lot of Arts Council money, because I think my education at the Royal College of Art curatorial programme was paid for by the Arts Council, so I have to be a bit careful. So they did help me. It's kind of, I mean, it's interesting. The last thing that you said was quite interesting, how, you know, commercial gallery also does work a lot with the endorsement of museums and various arts institutions. I mean, we, you know, usually the first question we get asked is, have they got any museum shows? Are they showing at, you know, so we say, oh yes, they've got a show at the Margate Turner Contemporary. So I mean, that, you know, that there is on the business side of things, there is a very strong link between the commercial viability of artists and where they are exhibiting outside of the commercial world. I mean, that is, so all artists are trying to negotiate both. They're trying to negotiate both their position in the commercial world, but they're probably their primary thing is that their primary objective is to get shows in public museums, institutions, arts, centres, etc. So there is a strong link between the two in that sense.
You asked about visibility. I mean, I wasn't completely sure what you meant, but something went through my head, which was that, if an early career artist is, hasn't had a show, doesn't have some kind of reputation built up or public exposure, how do they then sort of get a foot in or get their work shown or get people looking at it? And it's something that we've thought about quite a lot, actually, because one of the things we've found, having tried lots of different ways of programming, is that kind of direct approach introduces a lot of problems in terms of the honesty of the relationship between us and the artist, the degree of expectation, and what can be done reasonably. And so for that reason, we've kind of taken a road where we really want to research and be able to make the first approach, so that we can say this is what we can do honestly and straightforwardly without there being any kind of false expectation there. And that's actually part of the reason that we decided to start this membership scheme, because it's a way of us being able to have an overview of a range of portfolios without it being tempered by somebody saying, "Oh, you should look at my friend," or whatever. But I think it is a challenge, and it is difficult to fairly deal with that kind of cold approach. I mean, it's not even happening very often at the artist-led level, and we certainly prefer to research our artists and find them.
But how would you do that?
You go to exhibitions, you look online, there's a variety of people doing different things. Go to degree shows.
So it is about a public form of presentation of so that is that.
Yeah, websites we look at, but you and there are things like Access Web, for instance, where you have kind of graduate portfolios online, and we look at those. But I suppose there's being completely honest about it, you also look for a working relationship. You look for the sense that somebody has a degree of control and awareness about how they're going to handle themselves with you.
I think those of you that were at the panel discussion last year, there was quite a lot of controversy around the gosh, I've forgotten her name, who was running the China. Emily, what's the name of the China Shop Gallery in Oxford? What's her name? That's right, Jennifer Brown, who was Jonathan's equivalent, and was talking about how, as a commercial gallery, what she expects from artists in terms of how they conduct themselves almost. And that was quite, that caused quite a lot of kind of unhappiness, I think, because people were saying, but why should you have to be this sort of business-like, adopt these sort of business-like approaches, when actually it's all about the work, and people should just be dealing with the best work and not the best artists in the way that they can present themselves. And I think that was that was quite an issue for some people. But I mean Jennifer was absolutely clear that how can she deal, she found it problematic to deal with artists who didn't have that kind of sense of responsibility for their own career, if you like.
Well, I hope as galleries we can take some of that on board, and actually, I mean, it's not all, hopefully we're doing something that the artists themselves can't do. We're trying to add to what they're bringing to the table. I mean, they are my clients as much as the collectors who buy their work. I'm trying to work with them. They all have different agendas, they're different personalities, different strengths. I hope as a gallerist we can add to what they do and try and create some kind of economy for them.
But
and some visibility. And also in the gallery, I mean, you know, talk about like subsidising, etc. I mean, actually, the gallery is kind of a model of cross-subsidisation. Invariably, what happens in the galleries, we have, at certain points, we have one artist whose work is getting a lot of attention, maybe market-wise, maybe some prominent collector has bought some work and suddenly there's a big economy around that. And what generally happens in the gallery is that kind of feeds back into the gallery, and that will support maybe the next exhibition, which perhaps nobody's even remotely interested in, or it's a much more complicated offer. That's generally actually how, you know, there's always seems to be a cross-subsidisation within the gallery itself.
Can I just ask a question of you, Adam? Because we've talked before about, if you'll pardon me, the fact that you've not worked recently, until quite recently, with a commercial gallery. Yet you've had a very successful career, and you're very visible. Your work is, well, from my point of view, pretty well visible, at least in this country and certainly internationally as well. So I'm interested in how you've managed to make that possible for yourself, what kind of other means you've been able to find to do that. To be able to manage to make really high quality work without having somebody like Jonathan to support that financially, or have the admin side that he does, all the boring stuff for you.
I don't know, it feels like the answer to that is sort of only just. And again, it's had to keep on changing. So there's some nice things out there, like the Paul Hamlin Awards, which, you know, so there's things like that, and again they appear and disappear. There's so yeah, I don't quite know. I mean, through teaching, and
but you've managed to get people to know about it. You haven't had someone behind you promoting it and putting it in front of people.
Yeah.
Because you looked a bit kind of worried about what Matthew was saying about them looking
no,
for.
I was just
wondering
curious about
what
that.
you think about that.
I guess because it was going back to what I was saying about, you know, when I'm teaching, and where I perceive often the most kind of exciting and challenging things are happening they're not necessarily with the most sort of professionalised students, and sometimes the ones, I mean, there was a phase, again with all these things, they go through real phases, so there was a point where, through having done the Goldsmiths MA myself, there's a point where the students can ask for an artist or a critic or a curator to come and speak to them, and it was there were a number of years where it was the most excruciating tutorials, probably because they're meant to last up to 3 hours. But it was because there was a phase where the student was so certain that they were ready for commercial gallery success. So they actually didn't want a dialogue at all. They just wanted to wait until you'd stop talking, so that they could then say, so where do you think I should take my slides? And then that shifted, and it's back to being, something which is a much sort of healthier, exploratory, experimental situation there. But so that's why I was just I was just sort of thinking when Matthew, when you were saying that you would look if they're already showing, and I was thinking, well, there is, this fantastic resource now of the internet whereby people can actually sort of keep in touch and give this, the suggestion that something's going on very economically. But I was also thinking that there used to be this thing called the studio visit, which I know it does still go on from time to time, but even when I was in a big group of studios, subsidised studios in the centre of London, Delphina Studios, which has since gone, and this is when all the other kind of artist studios had to move out because of economic reasons, so Acme and Space were no longer in the centre, but there was Delphina, which was in Bermondsey, right next to Tate Modern, and occasionally you would get a group of people curators who would come through from the British Council would organise that or something. But most of the time, it just wasn't happening. And curators at the Tate and critics and everyone, they really want to do these things. So it's not for lack of willing. They love the idea of going to an artist studio, but there just doesn't seem to be the time or the space to be able to do that anymore. So then you end up with this unfortunate situation that you do have to do a certain amount of you know, if the expectation, you know, and I think it's very difficult because there are some people who I think are brilliant artists, but they find it very difficult to kind of negotiate that step, to have the social skills to do it. And so there is very good work going on in some studios which remains pretty invisible.
So it's about that issue of visibility. Stephanie?
I was just going to sort of talk a bit further about the particular circumstances down in the South East, actually, in the way that it's slightly different from London in the fact that we don't have a huge amount of commercial galleries and commercial spaces that have the right level of people buying work with them. And I think either you see an exodus of artists and students going to London, as Joella's had to do, or you see people making their own opportunities. But I think also that has resulted both in a diversification of practice, of people not making work for traditional spaces, and also a number of platforms developing which don't need spaces in order to show work. And so you're seeing things like Folkestone Triennale, Whitstable Biennale, work in National Trust properties, work in an array of spaces in museums, and it's looking beyond the scope of just a straightforward space into where does your work fit, where does your work resonate, and how can that push your practice forward? Because I think we do have this issue across the South East of actually those traditional routes aren't as concrete. And I'm just interested in the other opportunities that the panel see for artists making work, where they can take the initiative and get work seen by the right people.
I actually think that, you know, to say that, you know, you're an artist working in the South East and there aren't a lot of commercial kind of outlets, it's not really, I mean, the market is international, it's everywhere. You can be an artist making work in Margate and selling your work in New York City. I mean, the distance between Margate and New York City is not much different than the distance between London and New York City. I mean, it's about 70 miles on a big, long journey. So I don't think that, I think you can work, of course, there may be like an initial moment, maybe when you're a younger artist, you feel like you have to be in this sort of epicenter in London. But I think the way things are now, I mean, people can be anywhere and make work. If you can actually successfully use these communication skills and get to people, you can be anywhere in the world. And you know, there are so many young artists who are in London or actually make the journey to London. And I mean, I'm surrounded by them. I know them. They're my friends. They're I know these people. I live with these people, and you know, a lot of people get caught in this situation where they're working like 5 days a week for a studio they've never got any time to be in. It's like a sort of, you know, we've recently bought a building down here in Margate as a place to show work. We're not going to operate our commercial gallery from here, but we are going to do a show once a year here. And we are, you know, we brought artists down here. Some of them are like majorly successful commercial artists and showing them amongst some other artists maybe less commercially successful at the moment, but you know, we have an artist who actually lives in our house, who will be doing in our building, who will be doing an exhibition with in London in January. I mean, that's sort of like, there isn't much of a market. The market is not local; it's everywhere. You don't have to be, you know, you can be here and you can be showing anywhere in the world.
But is there not a first step? I mean, yes, you're right. I think you can be based anywhere, but where is that first connection between the people who will promote you and the individual artist first trying to step out? There has to be a jump at some point where that connection's made.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be your immediate. I mean, of course, it's going to be your immediate community that you were probably at art school with, or generally that's your community, isn't it? Who you're at art school, other students who. You know, you're both your community, and that's also your audience to start with. I mean, the first people that come to your exhibitions will be your friends. Yeah. Hopefully, you have some. But you know that, you know, even when you do, you know, these exhibitions in London, it's not this other huge audience. It's basically it's a community that's like visiting everybody else's exhibitions, and everybody supporting each other, friends supporting each other in a really organic way.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose if you're outside of London, it is harder to get that critical mass. But I think also economic forces are pushing people to consider coming to places like this more often.
I think in a place
and I know that people are talking, and I mean, I have a place here. Obviously, I'm a bit of an ambassador for it. I mean, I do talk about the place constantly. I mean, you can get amazing spaces here. I mean, you're an hour on the train from London. People can come down here people do come down here. A lot of people come to visit this museum. A lot of curators come down here. You can just walk down and try and grab one off the street and bring them to your studio.
Check out their shoes and then.
They're usually wearing black.
But I think that's true. Just really quickly.
Sorry, David.
Sorry?
Use them.
Are you here because Turner Contemporary's here, though?
Definitely.
Did you come first?
Definitely.
That's interesting.
So
Lauren.
it's not quite anywhere in the world that you can, do this kind of thing.
No, I was looking at places that were a low-cost base all along the southeast coast. There were lots of them, and I was looking for some. And then when I saw this, I thought, well, if the worst comes over, I can hold on to that rock.
Lauren, did you want to?
Yeah, I think Margate works best when these kinds of things happen, where, there have been a number of occasions, just a few weeks ago, actually, the weekend when our current show opened, the town was full of activity. That weekend there were so many things going on. And I think, it's, from my point of view, we've initiated various moments of trying to get people talking to each other. And the thing that was a real challenge for us at the beginning, actually, was that everybody was just looking to us. Like, if you guys aren't going to show our work, then there's no point in having a conversation. Obviously, that's moved on a lot now. And I think, obviously there were plenty of people at the time who didn't say that, who understood that there needed to be a more complex conversation. And it's, it's a kind of interrelated network of people. But I think now, what we all can do for each other is to signpost things that are happening and then go, wow, Margate, like, you could spend 3 days there and not see everything. And I think if we can manage to do that a few times a year, and it's not that difficult to do, then that's amazing. And actually, all the artists who are involved in living and working in the area, all they have to do is sit in their studio and open the door, if you get the communication right. And then people come. But, I think it helps to be in a place like this, or, there's lots of other towns around the coast of Kent and Sussex and other parts of the southeast, where, if you can, I think you have to be bigger than the sum of your parts by making it look like there's a lot happening, and then it is, in a way. I don't know.
It just, it does feel, I take what you said, Adam. I think there's bound to be a huge amount of truth in it, that there must be loads of people making the best work and no one's ever seen it. And I think this is true across all art forms and probably into other disciplines as well. I think maybe that's just a sad reality. If you can't see something, you can't see it, can you?
So show it.
Show it. Sorry, Naomi, because she's not spoken. Actually, I think we're going to have to finish on you've got the last word, because we're up to time.
Maybe it's a positive word.
Yes.
Mike.
I made
Mike.
a conscious decision to stay in Kent and not go to London and to study locally. And that was a conscious decision, because this is where my family is, this is where I'm based, this is where I worked in Little Turner and had my exhibitions. And I have a studio and an old gasworks in my village now. So after much deliberation, I feel it's probably the right move for me, and I'm hoping that I can make a career here in Kent successfully without the draw to London, hopefully.
Good.
We shall see if that happens.
Good. Well, thank you. We are going to move on to our next section of our orchestrated evening. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Jonathan, Matthew, Lauren, Adam, Joella for their contributions and for your questions as well. I'm sure everybody's around, so we can keep the conversation going. We've got a time now where you're all invited to go and see the platform exhibition if you've not seen it, and also the other exhibitions upstairs, wonderful exhibitions. And then we will be reconvening at 5 o'clock. Is that right now, or are we sure that we might?
It might be a little bit later. We have to see when Victoria gets.
We're waiting for Victoria to arrive, but we will let you all know.
Not too late after that.
We will reconvene and get on with the next part of the evening and make our announcement.
And that will happen upstairs in the Clore Learning Studio.
So thank you very much, and see you again soon.
Okay, so it's my job to just do the preliminaries and make all the thank yous. Actually, it's a very important part. So the platform awards and the platform programme, which is really kind of, you don't see that part. It's all the support that all the participating galleries have given to quite a substantial cohort of graduates from their region, and so I really wanted to thank all the people in those galleries that have been sort of at the cutting edge and really doing the one-to-ones with all the artists, and I think they've done a fantastic job. So I wanted to thank Emma and Hannah from Milton Keynes Gallery. They're not here tonight, but you can pass that on to them. Emily and Sarah from Modern Art Oxford. Emily's here tonight, thank you very much. Jonathan from Aspex, who's there. And of course, Lauren from Turner Contemporary. I think they've really done a fantastic job of supporting all the artists that have gone through the programme. And that really is the kind of crux of what we're trying to do here, is supporting new talent and all the kind of wonderful, exciting work that's coming out of the art galleries in the region. I also wanted to thank the artists that we interviewed last week, which were the shortlisted artists, because it was a tough thing for them to do. It's always a bit intimidating to be faced with the directors of the galleries, their sort of main public galleries and museums. But I have to say, from the selection panel's point of view, from the director's point of view, they found it an incredible experience and were incredibly impressed by the kind of confidence and the work, the quality of work that all the artists that we interviewed were showing. So I just wanted to name check all those artists and just thank them individually for their contribution and their hard work in coming to meet us all and doing their best and the fantastic quality of their work. So we want to thank Callie Shabolt, who was, and her wonderful, beautiful and mysterious objects. We wanted to thank Alex Vahol. Is that right, Alex? Is that right? She gave me some tuition on how to pronounce her name. And her work, which was crossing the kind of nostalgic and contemporary photographic image. Pascal Wilson and her kind of riotous, carnival-esque objects and performance. Alex Padfield, where's Alex? And your kind of wonderful, evocative film and installations, which were so seductive. Louise Fitzgerald, where is she? Thank you, Louise, with your kind of amazing, colour-rich and impressive work, tackling some really interesting current issues. Dom Callaghan with his wearables, we all like the ponchos, and again addressing really interesting relationships between artists and their audience. Hannah Alison Finucane, where's Alison? She's at the back somewhere. There she is, Alison. And your beautiful, beautiful, unique prints. I mean, I say unique because they really are unique, and you can see those downstairs. They're really beautiful. And Charlotte, whose work we can see here, and her stunning and dramatic effects using light and shadows. So I think, all in all, a fantastic selection, which made, obviously, the choice extremely hard, at which point I will pass you on to Adam.
Okay, so the winner of the Platform Graduate Award 2013 is Dom Callaghan.
Well, welcome and thank you everyone for being here tonight to celebrate this momentous moment for you, but for all of us. And we very much hope that there will be more platform events coming out of this. I think as a group of galleries working together, we've learnt a huge amount this is our second year of platform, working with recent graduates and all the universities across the South East has been incredibly positive. I hope for the universities and the students and graduates, as well as for the galleries. I think it's really important that the creativity that all of the recent graduates are showing and the universities are encouraging and nurturing, it comes through into galleries such as Turner Contemporary, Milton, Keynes, Aspex, Modern Art Oxford, and other galleries around the region who are very keen to participate in the platform programme going forward. So without further ado, I'd like to thank you all for being here this evening. Thank everyone who's been involved in the process, whether you're someone who's put in to be one of the platform group, whether you're an artist who's been interviewed and gone through a sort of process, and whether you're someone at the university who helps and supports students. And I'd also like to thank all of our colleagues across the gallery sector. But I'd particularly like to thank Adam for his role in being an artist who has taken a keen interest in what's happened through the platform process this year and was part of the interviewing process. So Adam gave up a lot of time to work with all of us. I'd also like to thank Amanda King, who coordinates the Contemporary Visual Art Network across the South East and who has been incredibly involved in working with all the galleries throughout the whole platform process. And I'd also really like to thank Lauren Wright, our curator here at Turner Contemporary, who has worked very, very closely with all the participants here at Platform in Margate, but has also worked very collaboratively with Amanda and colleagues across the sector. So thank you all for being here today, and I hope you've had a really great afternoon, and we look forward to welcoming you back again in the future. Unfortunately, this work comes down imminently. It comes down on Sunday evening, I think, and then we are putting up a solar lit wall drawing on this space. So if anyone's not familiar with Turner Contemporary, do come back. From the 29th of November, we will have this amazing solar lit wall drawing on these walls. Also on the weekend of the 29th and 30th and 29th and 30th of November and 1st of December, we will have Made Contemporary. So there will be an opportunity to see designer makers' works from right across Kent here in the gallery spaces and work by recent students. So do come back. And I know some of you have travelled a very long way, but see what we've got on at the moment and come back, because next year we've got an amazing Turner and Frankenthaler exhibition, followed by Mondrian and Spencer Finch. So thank you very much, all of you, for being here tonight.